The sun was setting over the battlefield, casting long shadows across the ground. The air was thick with the stench of death, the sound of metal clashing against metal, and the screams of the wounded and dying. As the last rays of light disappeared, the blood from the slain soldiers began to seep into the ground. It flowed like a river, pooling around a forgotten husk buried deep beneath the soil. At first, there was no movement, no sign of life. But as the blood continued to soak into the earth, something stirred beneath the surface. A hand broke through the dirt, followed by an arm and then a head. The figure emerged from the ground, covered in dirt and grime, dazed and confused. He looked around, disoriented and unsure of where he was. The soldiers on the battlefield wore armor and carried weapons he didn't recognize, and their banners held no meaning to him. His mind was a blank slate, devoid of memories or any sense of identity. He stumbled towards the nearest soldier, hoping for answers, but before he could get close, the soldier attacked. The figure's movements were sluggish and uncoordinated, and he struggled to defend himself. The soldier's sword grazed his arm, drawing blood. But as the blood trickled down his skin, the figure felt a sudden jolt of energy surge through his body. It was a feeling he recognized, though he couldn't place where he had felt it before. Instinct took over and the figure fought back with renewed vigor, his eyes locked onto the soldier's throat. The taste of blood filled his mouth as he sank his teeth into the soldier's neck, draining him dry. The hunger inside him was insatiable, and with each soldier he killed, he grew stronger. The figure continued to fight, his movements growing more fluid and controlled as he consumed the blood of his enemies. His body was healing, and he could feel his strength returning with each passing moment. As he fought, memories continued to flicker through his mind, each one bringing him closer to the truth of his identity. He saw himself as a young boy, watching helplessly as his family was slaughtered before his eyes. The memory was brief, but the pain and fear it evoked were overwhelming. The figure was forced to snap back to the present as a group of soldiers surrounded him, their weapons raised. He fought back with renewed vigor, his movements graceful and deadly. He may not have known who he was, but he knew how to fight. Another memory surged forward, this one of a teenage boy scavenging for food in an ancient town. He remembered the desperation, the gnawing hunger that seemed to never go away. But he also remembered the fierce determination that had kept him alive. The figure dodged a sword thrust and retaliated with a quick strike, taking out his opponent with a single blow. He was starting to feel like himself again, like a predator unleashed upon the battlefield. The next memory was more vivid than the others, a vision of an old man offering him power. The figure recoiled at the memory, unsure of what it meant. He fought off another group of soldiers, their cries of pain fueling his growing strength. A field of blood and fire was the next memory, the figure standing atop a pile of bodies, each one impaled on a wooden stake. The memory filled him with a sense of satisfaction, and he pushed it away, focusing on the present once again. More soldiers approached, their weapons glinting in the fading light. The figure met them head-on, his movements almost fluid as he cut through their ranks. He still didn't know his name, but he was starting to remember who he was. The next memory was more abstract, a vision of a kingdom crafted in blood and fire. The figure wasn't sure if it was a memory or a dream, but it left him feeling happy. The battle raged on, the figure carving a path through the enemy lines. He was stronger now, more sure of himself. And then it hit him, a name that he couldn't quite place. It was on the tip of his tongue, taunting him with its elusiveness. The final memory was a vision of endless darkness, a void that seemed to stretch on forever. The figure shuddered, filled with dread, unsure of what it meant, but knowing that it was important. The battle was over, the figure standing amidst a field of corpses. He was battered and bloody, but alive. And he was starting to remember who he was. Kain. The first of his kind, but not the last. He was born into poverty, but had forged and destroyed kingdoms. How did he get here? What had happened to him to bring him here? As I stood amidst the sea of corpses, I surveyed my surroundings. My eyes darted around, looking for any sign of danger. Despite my disorientation, my instincts were sharp, honed by centuries of survival. I was starting to remember who I was, Kain, the first of my kind. I was born into poverty, but had risen to power, forging and destroying kingdoms. I noticed the blood pooling around me, slowly inching its way up my ragged boots, through my whole pants and into my skin. Instead of feeling repulsed, I welcomed it. The taste of blood was a familiar one, and with each drop that seeped into my pores, I felt my strength return. I looked at the dead soldiers around me, noticing two different kinds of banners and colors. They must have been from different armies. I scavenged clothes, armor, and weapons from the battlefield, relishing the feel of the cool metal in my hand. As I equipped myself, memories began to flood my mind, a chalice, a sense of purpose, a voice offering me power. I needed to know more, to understand what had happened to me and why I was here. And I would stop at nothing to find out. As I moved through the forest, I kept my distance from the locals, hoping to avoid any unwanted attention. But fate had other plans. A group of bandits spotted me and started approaching with swords drawn. I had no choice but to defend myself. The bandits rushed towards me, their faces twisted in anger and greed. I could hear the clang of their weapons as they drew closer, ready to attack. I braced myself for the fight, my body coiled like a spring. The first bandit lunged at me with a rusty sword, but I easily sidestepped his attack. I felt a surge of energy, and without thinking, I grabbed him by the arm and twisted it behind his back. He cried out in pain, and I could hear the snap of bone. With one swift motion, I snapped his neck, and he fell to the ground, lifeless. The other bandits hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. But their hesitation was brief, and they attacked with renewed vigor. I could see the hunger in their eyes, a primal need for blood and wealth. I fought them off, my movements swift and deadly. I could feel the hunger within me growing, and with each bandit I killed, I fed as well, gaining more knowledge of the language. But it was not enough. The bandits were relentless, and I could feel myself tiring. Their attacks were uncoordinated, but their numbers were overwhelming. I took a blow to the shoulder, and I could feel the bone crack. But I didn't stop fighting. I couldn't afford to. With a growl, I lunged forward, my fangs bared. The last of the bandits fell to the ground, his blood pooling around him. I stood there, panting and covered in blood. My hunger was sated, but only for a moment. I needed more blood, more knowledge of this strange language. I looked at the bodies around me, and with a sense of purpose, I began to drain them of their blood. As I consumed their life force, their memories flooded into me, and I could feel myself becoming more fluent in their language. My hunger was insatiable, a deep-seated craving that could never be fully quenched. The blood of the bandits had provided me with a temporary respite, but I knew it would not be enough. As I stood amidst the corpses, I felt the hunger within me growing once again. I needed more blood, more knowledge of this strange language that surrounded me. But for now, I had to be cautious. I could not afford to draw attention to myself, not with the local patrols on high alert. I moved stealthily through the forest, taking care to avoid any potential threats. My eyes scanned the area for any signs of danger, while my ears listened intently for any sounds out of the ordinary. I moved like a predator, silently stalking my prey. The night was quiet, with only the sound of the rustling leaves underfoot and the occasional hoot of an owl. As I searched for a place to rest, I couldn't help but feel a sense of nostalgia. The forest reminded me of my homeland, where I had once roamed free and hunted without fear. But those memories were a distant echo, and now I was alone in a world I didn't understand. I spotted a cave in the distance, hidden behind a thick tangle of vines and foliage. It looked like the perfect spot to hole up for the day, away from the harsh rays of the sun. As I approached the entrance, I took care to check for any traps or signs of danger. Satisfied that it was safe, I stepped inside and made myself comfortable. The cave was cool and damp, a welcome relief from the muggy night air. I settled in for the day, letting my mind wander as I rested. I thought back to the battlefield and the memories that had resurfaced. The thirst for blood, the rush of power, the satisfaction of victory. These were the things that drove me, that made me who I was. But there was still so much I didn't know about this world, and I was determined to learn all I could. I knew that I would have to be careful, that I couldn't reveal my true nature to anyone. But I was a survivor, and I would do whatever it took to stay alive. As the first rays of sunlight crept into the cave, I closed my eyes and drifted off to sleep, dreaming of the adventures that lay ahead. I woke up just as the sun began to set, feeling the cool breeze of the night on my skin. I stood up, stretching my limbs and flexing my muscles, feeling the strength coursing through me. My hunger was still there, but it was more manageable now. I needed to find a way to sate it without drawing attention to myself. As I walked through the forest, my mind was racing with questions. How did I end up buried beneath the earth? Who was that old man in my memories? And most importantly, where was I? The faint glow of lights in the distance caught my eye, and I felt a spark of hope. Maybe the town held the answers I sought. I quickened my pace, my eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger. I had to be cautious, but I was also curious. What kind of people lived in this world? As I entered the outskirts of the town, I could see that most businesses were closed for the night. But I could hear faint sounds of laughter and conversation from within the buildings. People were still awake, enjoying the night. I wondered if I would ever be able to blend in with them. I walked down the empty streets, my footsteps echoing through the silence. I felt out of place, like a stranger in a foreign land. The architecture of the buildings was unfamiliar to me, and the language was still a mystery. But I was determined to learn, to understand this new world I found myself in. I stopped in front of an inn, the sign creaking in the wind. It seemed like the kind of place where I could gather information. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, the warmth and smells of the place enveloping me. The inn was bustling with activity, despite the late hour. People were gathered around tables, drinking and laughing. I could hear snippets of their conversations, but I couldn't understand most of it. I made my way to the bar, hoping to find someone who could help me. The innkeeper, a stout man with a bushy beard, looked at me with suspicion as I approached. I could see the tension in his muscles, ready to act if I posed a threat. I tried to look as non-threatening as possible, but it was hard with my ragged clothes and unkempt appearance. "Can I help you, stranger?" the innkeeper asked, his voice gruff. "I'm new in town," I said, struggling with the unfamiliar words. "I'm looking for information." The innkeeper eyed me warily. "What kind of information?" "I need to know more about this place," I said. "The people, the customs, the language. I'm a traveler, and I want to learn." The innkeeper seemed to relax a bit, though he still looked wary. "Well, you're in luck. This is the best inn in town, and I know everything there is to know about this place." I thanked him, relieved to have found someone willing to help me. I ordered a drink and sat down at a nearby table, listening to the innkeeper as he regaled me with tales of the town and its inhabitants. I absorbed as much as I could, eager to learn and understand this new world. As the night wore on, the inn began to empty out. The patrons left one by one, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I had a lot of questions, but I was starting to piece together some of the answers. I needed to keep learning, to keep adapting. And I needed to find out more about that old man and the power he had offered me. But for now, I was content to rest and gather my strength for the challenges to come. After finishing my conversation with the innkeeper, I heard a nearby group of men talking. As I listened in on the group of men discussing their plans to extort money from a local merchant, I felt a familiar sense of hunger stirring within me. Their cruel intentions didn't bother me, I was no protector of the innocent. But I was intrigued by their scheme and how it could potentially benefit me. After finishing my conversation with the innkeeper, my mind raced with the possibilities of what I could gain from this new world. My ultimate goal was to regain my strength and power, to once again become a ruler. To do so, I knew that I needed to understand this new world, its culture, society, and technology. As I walked through the quiet streets of the town, my senses heightened to everything around me. I watched the people as they moved about their daily lives, observing their behaviors and interactions. I listened to their conversations, trying to decipher their language and understand their customs. The criminals in the alleyway presented an opportunity for me to gain more knowledge about the criminal elements of this world. They were loud and brash, making no attempt to conceal their intentions. As they made their way to their target, I followed them from a distance, watching and learning. As I kept my distance, I watched as they approached the door of a small shop on the outskirts of town. The men began to bang on the door, demanding payment from the owner. Their actions were reckless and foolish, but it gave me an opportunity to observe and learn about this world and its inhabitants. As I listened from my hiding spot, I realized that I needed a better view of the situation. I quietly moved to a location where I could see the interaction between the criminals and the merchant. From there, I watched as the criminals banged on the door, demanding payment from the owner. As I watched from my vantage point, I could see the desperation in the merchant's eyes as he emerged from the shop. He was a stout man with a bushy beard, and he held his ground despite the odds stacked against him. His fists were clenched, and he spat angry words at the criminals. The criminals surrounded the merchant, taunting and jeering at him as they demanded payment. The merchant stood his ground, refusing to give in to their demands. The tension in the air was palpable, and it seemed that any moment the situation could turn violent. Suddenly, one of the criminals lunged at the merchant, throwing a wild punch that landed squarely on his jaw. The merchant stumbled back, dazed by the blow. The other criminals quickly joined in, raining down blows on the defenseless merchant. Despite being outnumbered and outmatched, the merchant fought back with surprising ferocity. He landed a few well-placed punches and kicks, but it was clear that he was fighting a losing battle. The criminals were too many, too strong, and too ruthless. The sounds of fists hitting flesh and bones cracking filled the air as the fight between the criminals and the merchant escalated. The criminals were clearly more experienced fighters, and they quickly gained the upper hand. The merchant was brave, but he was no match for his attackers. One of the criminals grabbed the merchant by the collar of his shirt and slammed him against the wall of his shop, demanding payment once again. The merchant spat in his attacker's face, refusing to give in to their demands. The criminal responded with a swift punch to the face, causing the merchant's head to snap back against the wall. As the fight raged on, it was clear that the merchant was badly outnumbered and outmatched. He was battered and bloodied, but he refused to give in. The criminals grew more aggressive, fueled by their desire for money and power. I watched as the fight took its toll on the merchant. His movements became slower and more labored, and it was clear that he was on the brink of defeat. I felt no compassion for him, but I knew that the situation could work to my advantage. I continued to observe the fight, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. As the criminals focused their attention on the merchant, I slipped closer, my senses on high alert for any signs of danger. As I approached the fight, I noticed that one of the criminals had strayed from the group and was now standing a short distance away, keeping a lookout. He was an easy target, and I decided to take advantage of the situation. I saw an opportunity to use the criminals to my advantage, and I could not afford to let them slip away. They were a potential resource in my quest to regain my power and control. I waited for the perfect moment to strike, taking advantage of their distraction to incapacitate one of them and drain his blood. With the knowledge I had gained, I knew that I could use their criminal activities to my advantage, manipulating them to serve my own purposes. I moved silently towards one of the criminals, my footsteps muffled by the soft dirt beneath my feet. He was so focused on the fight that he didn't even notice me until it was too late. With a swift motion, I struck him in the back of the head, rendering him unconscious. As I drained his blood, I absorbed his knowledge of the criminal underworld in the town. He was a low-level thug, with little information of value. However, it was a start. As the other criminals were distracted by their comrade's sudden fall, I seized the opportunity to strike. With lightning-fast movements, I killed the other two criminals, ensuring that they would not be able to cause any further trouble. But I did not drain them, as I did not want to risk the merchant seeing what I truly was. Instead, I left them lying on the ground. It was not my mess to clean up, and it would be a reminder for the merchant why he would pay me for protection. With the criminals taken care of, I approached the merchant. He was battered and bruised, but he was alive. I hauled him up by his throat, demanding he'd pay me the protection money they had tried to collect since I protected him. The merchant was visibly afraid and he smelled of fear. He was being choked, and couldn't speak, but somehow he still found a way to nod his head in agreement. He would pay. They would all pay in the end. He was the first of many. I let go of the merchant's throat and he fell to the ground. His legs didn't catch him, and he made a sound of pain as he hit the floor. I guess having multiple broken bones didn't ease his fall. With sounds of pain, the merchant managed to get him and bring my money from the back. I took then and headed off into the night. I'd start with the criminals, they have a good thing going on with the protection money. I can use that as a stepping stone. But first I need to figure out more about them. Are they organized, or just lone band of criminals acting on their own? As I made my way through the dark streets, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. The town was mine for the taking, and I intended to take advantage of it. I needed to learn more about the criminal underworld in the town, and I knew just where to start. I would need to be careful, though. I couldn't let anyone suspect my true nature. At least, not yet.